In this video, we're going to follow up on our discussion of the gender and eye contact effect, but in this video, we're going to consider the possibility of an interaction. So far, we've been using an additive model, and an additive model assumes that there's no interaction between gender and eye contact. In other words, it assumes that the gender effect is the same for both levels of eye contact, and the eye contact is the same for both genders. So let's just sort of get a rough idea of what that means in terms of a graph. So I'm going to put ratings on the y-axis since that's my response variable. And I kind of have to decide how to display this. I think I'm going to put gender on the x-axis. So I've got female and male officers, and then I'll use an overlay for the eye contact effect. Okay, so we've got a certain gender effect, right? We said that female officers tend to give higher ratings than male officers. So we've got a certain gender effect, and that's represented in the graph here by the slope. And let's let this line represent no eye contact. But we also have an eye contact effect, right? The ratings tend to be higher when they see the photograph with eye contact than when they don't. So we've got a certain eye contact effect. So what no interaction means is that the size of this effect, the distance between the 2 points, is the same regardless of gender. So I'm going to try to do the same distance here, and that's going to end up with a line like this. So the distance between the two lines, which is showing the difference between no eye contact and eye contact, is the same whether you're talking about female officers or male officers. Another way to think about this is looking at the slopes. So the slope would represent the gender effect, and we're saying that the decrease that you get from male officers compared to female officers is the same regardless of whether the picture showed eye contact or not, right? They've got the same slope either way. And I want to emphasize that this is not based on the data. This is an assumption that we made when we wrote out our model. Remember how we stated our model in the previous video? We had an effect for gender, and we had an effect for eye contact. They were totally separate from each other, and we just added them together. That's why it's called an additive model. So we weren't taking into account the possibility that the effect of eye contact might depend on the officer's gender, right? That maybe one gender of officer cares more about the eye contact than the other, something like that. So let's consider a possibility where we do have an interaction between gender and eye contact. So this means that the effect of one of the variables changes based on the value of the other explanatory variable. So I'm just going to do another rough sketch here. And again, this is just total speculation. This is not based on the data. This is just one possibility where you could get an interaction. So let's say I'm going to do female and male on the axis, set it up the same way as before. And let's say my graph ended up looking like this. So we can tell that there's an interaction because the lines are not parallel anymore. Why don't you take a second and think about how you would describe this? Pause the video and see if you can write a sentence that describes this interaction. So roughly speaking, there's two ways that we can describe this interaction. We can do it in terms of the eye contact effect, or we can do it in terms of the gender effect. So let's start with eye contact. So if we're talking about the eye contact effect, we might start off by pointing out that when eye contact is present, the ratings tend to be higher, and that's regardless of gender. So I'm going to say both genders tend to assign higher scores when eye contact is present. So looking at the graph, we can see that the plus signs are higher than the open circles regardless of gender. But notice that I haven't said anything about interaction yet. So far I'm just saying the eye contact has the same direction no matter which gender, but I haven't said anything about how that effect changes based on gender. So that's what the second part of the sentence will do. But the effect is larger among male officers. So if we look at the distance between the plus sign and the open circle, we can see that for female officers, it's not a huge difference, pretty small effect of eye contact, whereas for male officers, it's much larger. So this is an interaction because the effect of eye contact has changed based on gender. So what if we want to describe it in terms of the gender effect? Again, we might want to start off just by saying that female officers tend to assign higher ratings. So female officers tend to assign higher ratings. That's true regardless of eye contact. We can see that these lines slope down. Both of the lines slope down. But I haven't said anything about interaction yet. So far, I've just talked about the gender effect, but I haven't talked about how it changes based on eye contact. So I'm going to add that here. And the gender gap is larger when there is no eye contact. So if we look at the slopes of the lines, we can see that when there's no eye contact, the slope is steeper, whereas when there is eye contact, the slope is flatter. So that's saying that the gender effect is more pronounced when there's no eye contact than when there is eye contact. So to get full credit for a description of interaction, you want to describe how the effect of one of the variables changes based on the other variable.